managing your stamina is an integral part of playing Gloomhaven and making sure that you don't exhaust too early, especially on those really hard scenarios. So in this quick guide, we're going to talk about all the factors that contribute to whether you should play a lost card early or late, how many lost cards you should play. We're going to talk about how starting hand size affects your choices. We're going to talk about assessing maps and how different maps, affect your stamina and how much longevity you're actually going to need. We're going to talk also about the effectiveness of a card and how that impacts when you should play it. And then we're also going to talk about how many turns do you really need? Do you need max turns? And if you don't, how many do you actually need? So stick with me. We're going to be using a program created by a site called Board Game Math for, some of our calculations. I'm not an actuary, so it's nice to have this really great tool. So shout out to them for creating such a great tool. I'm going to link it. I'm going to link to it down below in the description of the video, and let's get started. All right, let's talk about potential turns, max turns for starting classes based upon their hand sizes. This is not taking into account long rests, which we'll talk about in a little bit. It's not taking into account cards or items. This is just based upon playing cards. If you only played cards that you discard from start to finish, Tinkerer is going to get 36 rounds of longevity. Craghart's going to get 30 rounds of longevity. Brute and Mind Thief are each going to get 25 rounds of longevity. Scoundrel is going to get 20 rounds of longevity. And the outlier, and the reason I've put it last, is the Spellweaver is going to get 28 potential rounds of longevity using Reviving Ether, but only if you use it exactly right at the exact right time. So what do you want to do? You just want to be careful of that hand size. Pay attention to, which class you have, and really think about how the longevity is going to impact your total turns. And we'll dive way deep into this coming up. Okay, after we've, looked at our starting hand size and planned accordingly, we're going to go out and we're going to assess the map. And your mileage on this may vary depending on whether you can see the whole map or not. Some people are playing with full information, and in something like Jaws of the Lion, you can see all the monster placements. But Gloomhaven, if you're playing on Tabletop Simulator or something, you can have hidden rooms, so you're only going to be loading up one room at a time. But do your best to assess. Look at the special conditions, look at the special rules, etc. Do you have an NPC? How big do you think the map is? And then use that information to help guide your decisions. If you've got a lot of tough objectives and you're going to have to move a lot, you may have to be more careful about playing a loss early than you would if it's just a one room, kill everything that spawns, and, you can just blow cards to, keep enemy numbers down. So yeah, consider all those things, and let's move on to the next part. The next thing I want to talk about is playing lost cards early, and should you do it. So let's talk about effectiveness. You've got a multi-target attack. You can kill a couple enemies. You can damage another. It's turn one. Should you play the loss? Yes, you should. Maximum impact is the biggest determining factor as to whether you should play a loss or not. And let me explain why. So let's take the Craghart, for example. Craghart has 30 potential turns of longevity given the conditions we talked about before. Only short resting, no items, no other cards, nothing. 30 turns for the Craghart. You play a loss on turn one, your longevity drops to 25 turns. However, and you think, 5 turns, that's a lot. Yeah, okay, that's fair. But if you play the loss card on turn 14, you're only getting 26 turns of longevity. So you've waited 13 rounds, or turns, I'm using them interchangeably. Hopefully that doesn't bother anyone. It only costs you one more round of longevity to play that loss card on turn 1 versus turn 14. And I think that because of that, because you're only losing one round in this particular example, it's much better to just play that lost card when you're going to have that maximum effect, because I think a lot of people, they get caught in this trap of going, oh, I can never play lost cards early. And then you get near to the end of the scenario and you're using those lost cards in a less effective way. And I think, at certain points in time, that can cost you the scenario. So for the Spellweaver, if you play a lost card turn 1, it's going to cost you 3 rounds of stamina. If you have a hand size of 9 or 10, so we're talking Brute, Mind Thief, or Scoundrel, it's going to cost you 4 rounds of longevity. And then if it's hand size 11 or 12, which is Cragheart and Tinkerer, it's going to cost you 5 rounds of longevity. But just remember that if you use it turn 1 or turn 5, it doesn't make hardly any difference. Even out to, like I said, to the Cragheart, turn 14, it's only 1 round of longevity better. And so don't get too caught up in the trap of waiting late to play your lost cards. Play them when you can really just, hammer the monsters or, do a great healing effect or whatever it may be. Do you really need max turns? No, you don't. Tinkerer can go forever, but is not really very effective if you don't play any of his lost cards. So, do you want to just run around and, spend 7 hours on every scenario? Or do you want to have a good balance of, risk management and, doing some more damage, but playing some of those lost cards? In this example here, I've got a Cragheart, and the Cragheart's decided to play a lost card on turns 1, 2, 3, and 4. And so we can see here that by playing just over 1/3 of the Cragheart's cards, 4 losses here out of a total hand size of 11, that we've actually reduced the Cragheart's stamina from 30 rounds down to 14, so over a 50% reduction. But still, if you're in a 1-room scenario or a small scenario and it's, kill all enemies or you have to protect an NPC or something like that, you could potentially burn a lost card your first 4 turns and still have a reasonable amount of stamina to finish the scenario. And sometimes you really need to burn bright and then flame out to give yourself the best chance of beating some of the really hard scenarios. Or when you're playing on really high difficulty, sometimes the enemies are so dangerous that you've got to trade, some longevity to kill them before they can get to you, or you won't make it at all. Spellweavers, because of Reviving Ether, it gets ridiculously complicated around stamina and, how many lost cards you can play in a row and stuff like that. Go ahead, play around with the calculator so that you've got a good idea. It's especially important for you to understand how Reviving Ether interacts with your longevity and your overall strategy. And just remember that in the calculator, when you change some things, and I'm going to put a graphic up here, when you change some things, it doesn't necessarily remove all the lost cards. So you've got to unclick those cards so that the calculator is showing you the true result. So you're sitting at the table and you're like, I want to calculate how many turns I have left. Maybe you don't have your phone with you. Maybe you don't have access to a computer. A quick way of doing this is just counting it down. And I'll give you an example. So starting with an even amount of cards. Let's say we have 8 cards. Divide it by 2, and that's 4. And then you just count down. It's 4 plus 3 plus 3 plus 2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 1 for a total of 16 turns remaining. Let's say you're at 7. It's 7 divided by 2, and you always round down because you're going to have 1 card left over. So it's 7 divided by 2 is 3, and then 3, and then plus 2, and plus 1, and that's going to be a total of 12 turns. So you can see how by going from 8 cards to 7 cards, you lose 4 turns of longevity. And hopefully that helps you when you're at the table and you're just trying to figure out how much longevity do I have to finish these next 3 rooms or whatever it may be. At this point, if you could, please go ahead, hit that like button. It really helps me out a lot. And subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications so that when I publish content, you're notified. I've got another video too. I think you're really going to like it. It's 9 essential tips for beginning Gloomhaven players. I'm going to put a link up right here so you can go ahead and check that out. I think you're really going to like it. And also, down in the description, I've got a link to my recommended product pages on my website. I've got Gloomhaven gear in there. I've got some 3D printing stuff. I'm adding more stuff to it every day. Go ahead, check out all of my recommended stuff. And clicking on those links helps support my channel. So please go ahead, click on the links, and thank you so much. When you take a huge hit, you can mitigate that damage, even if it's not fatal, by throwing away a card, by losing a card. But should you actually do it? I want to give you an example here, and we'll talk kind of about the conventional wisdom that I hear out there on the interwebs and see if it actually holds up to some scrutiny. So let's take an example. Let's say you have 14 hit points and it's turn 1 and you take 12 damage from one attack. Should you lose a card to prevent that damage or not? I think most of the wisdom I see out there is you should never lose a card unless you're forced into it. And I agree with that somewhat, but not always. And let me give you an example. You've got lots of healing in your party. Go ahead, take that 12 damage, don't throw away a card. However, if you don't have a reasonable amount of healing, then you should actually throw away a card at that point. And here's why. Now you're going to be left with 2 hit points. Couple rounds down the road, you get hit for 2 damage, you throw away a card. Now you've thrown away a card each time, and it's probably only cost you 1 round extra of longevity to throw it away early, and you're at 2 hit points, whereas if you'd thrown it away in the beginning, you'd be at 14. So you don't want to get stuck in a situation where you're like, no, I'm not throwing away a card because I don't want it to impact my longevity. And then down the road, you're at low hit points and you're always in a precarious position for the rest of the scenario. And you get hit for a couple times at 2 damage each. And here you are throwing away cards each time. And then that's really destroying your longevity. So just, think about your party composition and how much healing you actually have when you're deciding whether to lose a card to mitigate damage early on especially. Long resting changes some things, and the first is that you don't play any cards when you long rest, so it actually increases your longevity. So if you're playing the Scoundrel or somebody who's got, a low hand size, or you've gotten yourself in a situation where you've had to play a couple losses early, make sure you're thinking about long resting, because each time you do, you extend your longevity. So maybe instead of picking up 1 extra loot, if you're in a hard scenario, you rest in the room and let your friends take it from you, and then you get that extra turn so that you're there at the final battle to really make a difference. And don't forget that when you're on your very last gasp, your last possible turn, you can long rest and act as a meat shield for your friends instead of just exhausting, because you either long rest or you choose to play 2 cards. One more piece of advice, be very, very careful when you are playing your last 2 cards in a turn so that you make sure you don't take fatal damage. So before you act on your turn, the 2 cards that you've decided to play are neither in your discard or in your hand. And so if you take damage at that point, you're going to have to throw away 2 cards out of your discard. You're going to have to lose them to mitigate that damage. And if you take a couple hits like that, throw away 2 cards, 4 cards, 6 cards, well, I don't have to tell you, your scenario is pretty much over. The rule's on page 28, and it is exactly as follows. Before a character acts in a round, the 2 cards chosen at the beginning of the round are neither in the player's hand or lost or discard pile, and so cannot be lost to negate damage. Keep that one in mind. Let's talk about our favorite potion, the Minor Stamina Potion. So a Minor Stamina Potion gives you back 2 cards, or depending on if you're playing with the new rules, they were nerfed, you can play it to get back 1 discard for a Minor Stam. they're going to affect your longevity. 2 cards is going to give you an extra turn, but that's not the main benefit. That's helpful, but the main benefit is playing your most powerful discard card within the same rest cycle more than once. And just remember, if you are playing by the new rules and you're only getting back 1 discard with a minor stamina potion, that you play it when you have an odd number of cards in your hand so that it actually gives you an extra turn of longevity. I recommend you go ahead and play around with this stamina calculator so that you understand the relationship between when you play a lost card, timing wise, and also whether you short or long rest. It's really going to help you improve your game and make sure that you've got a better understanding of when you're going to exhaust or how not to exhaust. And thank you so much for watching the video. Please, if this video helped you, hit that like button. It helps me out so much. It helps YouTube promote the video. Thank you again for watching.